Here we are again, and what a pleasure. Thank you very much, Hanake. It's a pleasure to be here in London with Umberto Eco. And this new book, The Prague Cemetery, I actually have the new English edition, and I have the American edition.
More scary.
More scary? Will that sell more books? We don't yet know. Anyway, I'm going to begin by reading something from the book and have you react to this reading. It's something that I think will give a sense to the English audience. It's discovering this book now. What you are up to when you talk about the universal form of every possible conspiracy. The word conspiracy is incredibly important here. From the picture created by Dumas, Alexandre Dumas, in reverence to the great writer, I wondered whether the bard had not discovered, in describing a single conspiracy, the universal form of every possible conspiracy. But later you say, on reflection, Dumas had invented nothing. He had merely put into story form what, according to my grandfather, Abbé Baruel, had already shown. This led me to think, even then, that if I wanted to sell the story of a conspiracy, I didn't have to offer the buyer anything original, but simply something he already knew or could have found out more easily in other ways. People believe only what they already know, and this is the beauty of universal, I can see you mumbling it, of universal conspiracy. So how do conspiracies form?
Yes, first of all, let me say another thing. The book was published in Italy in last October, one year ago. And in November, there was the blowing up of the WikiLeaks affair. And we discovered by the documents of WikiLeaks that every secret report sent to the government so-and-so was dealing with something that had already been published by Newsweek the week before. That it was so evident. So I was right, but it was not an idea of mine. So universal conspiracy. The first who wrote a marvelous essay on that item was Karl Popper, who said that, well, the idea of a universal conspiracy started at the times of Homer, in which everything happened in Troy was plotted the day before by the gods on the Olympus. And the idea of a universal conspiracy is a way to refuse our own responsibilities. That's why dictatorships used always the idea of a universal conspiracy in order not to admit their flaws and errors and mistakes. They are there. Having spent my first 10 years as a young boy educated under the fascist dictatorship, there was the universal conspiracy of the demo-Pluto-Judaic world, democracies, capitalists, and Jews, plus the English, who were very terrible people because they ate 5 times per day. And that was the horrible image presented to the poor Italians of people eating 5 times per day. Then only later I discovered that myself, belonging to a normal family, I ate 5 times a day. In the morning, then they gave me something to bring in the school for about 10 o'clock, then lunch, then 5 o'clock, and then evening. But you know, the image of the fat Churchill smoking his cigar and eating 5 times per day was a part of the universal conspiracy.
why Dumas?
Why Dumas? The title of my book is The Cemetery of Prague. The story of the Cemetery of Prague was published by the first time in German by a German spy, Goethe, spy, anti-Semite, and working for secret services. And he wrote 4 volumes of a story, very complicated, called Biarritz. And at a certain point, he imagined the idea of the universal plot made by the Jews coming from all over the world in the Prague cemetery during the night. Yeah, I don't know if you have visited the Prague Jewish cemetery is marvelous to see, but during the night it can be also very disquieting. And they come from every place in the world, and they introduce themselves. I am Rabbi Salomon from Singapore. I am Rabbi so-and-so from Amsterdam, and so on. And they plan the conquest of the world. So I think to have been myself to discover it. In the Joseph Balsamo by Dumas, you have absolutely the same scene. It takes place in a German mountain. The organizer of everything is Cagliostro. The one who gather are the Freemasons from all over the world, and they introduce themselves. I am master, the great master, so-and-so coming from Singapore. I am the great master coming from Amsterdam. And then are plotting in order to ruin the French monarchy. But the pattern was exactly the same, because this pattern worked with different targets. For Dumas, it was the Freemasons against the king. Then for Eugène Sue, there were the Jesuits. Then in the protocols of the elders of Zion and in the book of Goethe, they were the Jews. But it can work continuously. You can invent a new universal conspiracy. Tomorrow you have the empty slot.
As long as it's empty.
Yes, you have only to fill up the slot, and this works. But you will have to insist, universal conspiracy, because conspiracies exist. Probably in this moment in the city, there is a group of businessmen making a plot in order to conquer a bank or another. That's a plot. But if a plot succeeds, it is immediately discovered. There was a plot to kill Julius Caesar, and on the Ides of March, it was clear. There was a plot of Catilina, and Cicero denounced it in the Senate. It collapses, and we knew about it. The universal conspiracy, on the contrary, is a plot which is never discovered, because it has no face, no place. Is a sort of entity that nobody will never discover, so it can be used ad infinitum. It's like when great German sociologist Simmel said the most powerful secret is the empty one. Because if you have a real secret, it gives you a certain power, but this secret can be uncovered and you have no more secret. But if the secret is empty, you continue to say, like children, I know something about you.
Since I'm speaking to you, I'm going to verify an etymology and see if it's correct. Does the secret originally...
You
don't know?
No, I don't know that.
Because at least I have my favorite quotation about secrets is Thomas Jefferson, who said that for 2 people to keep a secret, one has to be dead. but the notion of secret and secretion, of something...
Yes, probably comes from, yes.
And so a secret in and of itself cannot really contain itself, right? But
if it is empty...
If it is
it
empty,
is
exactly,
protected,
that's what I was going to say. If it is empty, so
forever,
what?
Yes.
Forever.
Forever.
So, I mean, just to end with secret, also the notion of secret being a person, a secretary is someone who
Well,
originally
the secretary is the one who keeps the
your secret.
Yes.
And the piece of furniture, un secrétaire, is where you hide secrets.
Yes, certainly.
Right, you hide little pieces of paper behind little
But they are discoverable
They are
secrets.
discoverable.
And even your secretary, as it happens usually when you go to prison, immediately confesses everything, and you are condemned
This is why my mother always says, you know, they can't hang you for what you don't say.
No, now you have to instead of the secretary, to have an iPad. So. Is it a secret?
This is an amazing secret. It is. I'm not exactly sure what it says, but it says that my etymology of the word secret is really wrong. I find this really disconcerting, but we will have to have a debate about this in a while. So to come back to the notion of universal conspiracy, are conspiracies inevitable?
No, I mean, since conspiracies as the real ones, how to kill Julius Caesar, are, I think, inevitable. In the sense in which human beings are always fighting one against the other, so they have to plot the conquest of the ruin of an adversary. Yes, I think, except you change the human nature. The universal conspiracy is absolutely indispensable in order, as I said, or as Popper said, in order to deny to yourself or to your people that we are the responsible ones for something, and is the eternal problem of the scapegoat. Somebody else is charged with the entire responsibility.
An essay of yours I had an opportunity of reading today is called Inventing the Enemy.
Yes.
But it seems to me that inventing the enemy could also be called needing the enemy.
Needing and inventing, and inventing is the English title, isn't it, Joe? Because the Italian title is costruire, is building up, how to construct step by step the enemy. We need an enemy.
Why? Why do we need enemies?
For reinforcing our own identity. I tell you the story with which I opened the essay you are kindly quoting. I was in New York, I was talking with the taxi driver. I always talk with the taxi drivers because they give you the temperature, the general temperature. And he was a Pakistani, and he was asking me, where you do come from? I said, Italy. Where is Italy? In Europe. What kind of language? They English? No, we don't speak English. That's curious. And at a certain point, he asked, what is your enemy? I said, what do you mean? No, the enemy you have since centuries and centuries, you are fighting against, you are killing him and they are killing you, your eternal enemies. And I said, we don't have an enemy. We don't have a fixed enemy for, in the 19th century, for half a century, we had Austria, but then finished. By the way, we started the last World War with one enemy and we ended it with another one. So we don't have enemies. And he looked at me as I was really emasculated, and our people was, people without any form of virility, and so on and so forth. Well, by the way, what the French call l'esprit d'escalier, reflecting afterwards, I realized that no, we have an enemy. Simply the other people have an enemy outside the borderlines. We have an enemy inside the borderlines. For 2,000 years, the Italian cities were fighting each other. And even now, the Italian opposition was unable to win Berlusconi because they were fighting against each other. Berlusconi fell down by his personal virtue, not because of the virtue of the opposition. But that's another story. Every power had, in order to keep its people united, to invent somebody which was autre. In French, it sounds better with the capital A. Other and different, even though slightly different, but different. And then, like the Prague cemetery, even the image of the enemy follows certain fixed features. It has a pattern. Can you both, no, we have to confess the secret. No.
No.
Can you both please address the audience as they cannot hear when you look at, okay.
When you,
my dear audience.
They basically,
my dear audience.
you know, basically, I have a feeling they don't like it when we look at each other. So I kind of like looking at you, but the people at Intelligence Square would prefer that we refrain. So
okay,
don't look at me. Okay, so this is a form of enemy. I can't look at you.
What I was saying that was that from the beginning, one of the first pattern of the figure of the enemy is in the early years of Christianity, the Antichrist. It is curly ears, big nose, strange feet. But fundamentally it stinks. And the same pattern is used during the centuries to represent the Muslim enemy, the heretic enemy, the Jewish enemy. So always the same pattern to make the enemy archetypically repugnant, such that in every case you have to refuse it, in the sense in which Darwin demonstrated that the face movements in order to express disgust are all the same in every civilization. Certain movement of the mouth, of the nose, and so forth. So in every civilization there was a construction of the figure of the enemy. That's all. In this essay, I put down certain quotations of different kinds of enemies.
Everybody from Sartre to James Bond. You have Ian, a fantastic passage.
Yes.
You're a big reader of Ian Fleming.
Yes, I also wrote an essay on the novels of Fleming, not on the movies, on the novels of Fleming. Yes, and Fleming is exceptional because he has the Russian enemy, the German enemy, then the Chinese, Dr. No, the Chinese enemy. He has a good collection until the international one, which is bluffed, but another feature of the enemy in Fleming, it is that it's always of uncertain nationality. It's always a mixture, never a pure Englishman. So always a metek, only the effect of some blood mixture.
Here in this essay, you spell it out very clearly. You say trying to understand other people means destroying the stereotype without denying or ignoring their otherness. In the Prague cemetery, you have...
Sorry if I turn my head because I have to listen.
No, but it's true. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. In the Prague cemetery...
No, tell it to me, otherwise I don't understand.
No.
It's not natural. It's not natural. It doesn't sound natural.
It doesn't sound natural.
Tell me. So...
Yeah. In the Prague cemetery, you have told us a story with every character being absolutely real in history except for one. That character is haunting, Simonini, and you have constructed in him, I must say, probably what you wanted to construct, namely, construct merely in terms of invention. It is your invention. You have invented the vilest, ugliest, most horrendous, most disgusting, most despicable human being.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
No, that was my purpose.
But why? Why give us the depiction of somebody quite as ugly as he is?
Simonini is fundamentally a forger, but also a murderer, and fundamentally a racist. And in the opening pages, he pronounces horrible judgments, not only against the Jews, but against the German, the French, the Italians, the women. And he uses such a horrible material, such horrible cliche, that in a way I was preoccupied that some reader could identify him, herself with him. So to keep the reader distant, and probably also myself distant, I had to make him as repugnant as you said. Then, once taking this decision, there was also the sincere pleasure of the narrator to invent a character like this, to make him the most immoral person, because you know the story. He has the right patterns, and he decides if you sell them to the Freemasons against the Jesuits, or to the Jesuits against the Freemasons, or to a certain point he discovers that anti-Semitism is more rentable in that historical moment, and he concocts the protocols of the elders of Zion, and he participated to the Dreyfus affair, and he makes many other. It was an invented character because, for narrative reasons, otherwise I would have written another academic book on that story. I had to attribute to the same person the deeds of many others, so I had to invent it. But I insist in saying that it is the truest one of the old novel, because in telling the story, I had continuously the impression of speaking of somebody that was living around me. The world is full of Simoninis. And so I was telling a story of the 19th century, but I would like my reader to go around with this novel like a Bedecker visiting the world and say, oh, look, one Simonini, look, another Simonini. In every country you can do that with a certain probability of success.
Talk about, I want to question you a bit further about something you said in passing here, which is the pleasure you got in describing someone quite as ugly.
Yes, but the literature from the beginnings is full of text in which monsters, dragoons, and other horrible creatures are described. I think that Shakespeare felt a great pleasure in describing Richard III or Iago, or Dickens was very happy to describe Fagin. Is a way to
it is a way to exorcise some ugliness that we find.
But you know, since in a novel you try to describe the world such as it is, you can describe beautiful characters like Snow White or the Queen. There are the two possibilities. Usually they do both, the narrator. So maybe it's too invading Simonini, always there with his méchanceté, probably. And so you have the impression I insisted with my piano pedal more on the horrible side.
No, you do a very good job of making him repugnant.
Also because the only two nice characters of the book, Ippolito Nievo and Maurice Joly, are immediately killed, as it happens usually. And so I remained without the plus pole. I had only the minus one.
Well, you just to give people a sense of how he is described very early on in the very first pages. All I know about the Jews is what my grandfather taught me. My childhood years were soared by their specter. When I was old enough to understand, he reminded me that the Jew, as well as being as vain as a Spaniard, ignorant as a Croat, greedy as a Levantine, ungrateful as a Maltese, insolent as a Gypsy, dirty as an Englishman, unctuous as a Kalmyk, imperious as a Prussian, and as slanderous as anyone from Asti, is adulterous through uncontrollable lust, the result of circumcision which makes them more erectile, with a monstrous disproportion between their dwarfish build and the thickness of their mutilated protuberance.
So, he was a racist.
He was he certainly was a racist. Curious in some way as to the very, very beginning of our conversation, why we, in some way, we are constantly believing or putting our belief in something we already believe in.
Yes.
And at the same time, you said you want to create a Baedeker where people will recognize in some form or another, here is a monstrous...
Yes.
Yeah, here is a monstrous character. So in some way, is a book an attempt to disfigure, to unveil the truth about ugliness?
Yes. No, I didn't say that people want to believe only what they already believe. I say that secret services usually do that. And this book is not written for the secret services. It's written for the normal people who maybe can learn something they didn't know as yet.
You early on in the book, you say, what does a philosopher say? Odi ergo sum. I hate, therefore I am. Are you hearing me? I'm sorry, I'm looking at, I hate, therefore I am. It is as though hatred is much stronger.
Yes, the one who makes this sort of final discourse about hatred is Rachkovsky, the chief of the secret Russian secret police that played a role, even though uncertain in the construction of the protocols. But it is, frankly, it is after having given Rachkovsky those ideas that I understood better and discussing of that with a friend, the very nature of hatred as opposed to love. Love is a mutilating experience that separates you from the rest of the world. I love you, you want you love me, I don't want you to love somebody else, I don't want that somebody else loves you, so it's restricting the human community to a polarity between two persons, except the saints who go leeching the lepers, but they are not encouraging. Hatred, on the contrary, is generous, is social. It can unite an entire people against another another people.
You heard it here.
And,
Hatred is
and in
general.
fact, the dictatorial power do not invite people to love. They invite people to die against the hated enemy. So hatred is generous, and so it's easy to be maneuvered for political reasons. If not, you cannot explain, because the history of mankind starts with Cain and not with Mother Teresa of Calcutta. It starts with wars, massacres. People are hating animals, but because they are hating each other, interspecific. The animals hate the ones of the other species. A lion eats gazelles. Very difficult that a lion eats a lion. It's very rare, and it seems the wolf eat wolf, but only when they are killed, and they stop eating the wolf and they don't pursue the man. But man is an interspecific conveyor of hatred.
Since we're talking
it's
about...
not my fault. I mean,
No. I mean, we wish we could have it otherwise. But since we're talking about men as opposed to animals, one of the characteristics of men is that they have an incredible ability that animals may have less of lying.
Certain.
And your novel is also an exploration, not only about conspiracy and paranoia, but of the extraordinary ability which men may share with novelists of telling an untruth.
No, first of all, let me make a sharp distinction between lying and making fiction, because making fiction is a loyal game. I pretend that the girl called Snow White existed, and you, with me, you pretend to believe me, and we play this game, and after the end of the story, you go home and you know that Snow White did not exist. So there is no, I don't cheat you. I can make you to weep about the destiny of Snow White when she eats the apple, but for a short time, after the end of the movie or the story, that's all. Lie, on the contrary, wants me to make you to believe the contrary of the truth. And I arrived to be interested in forgeries just because, being interested in languages, I was interested on this specific human ability to tell the contrary of the truth. You know, to lie is to tell the contrary of the truth, knowing that it is the contrary of the truth, otherwise it's not a lie, it's a mistake, and in order to make another one to believe the contrary of the truth. That are the principal features of lie already described by St. Augustine, okay? Now, animals tell the truth. Not consider animals able to disguise themselves in order to cheat the enemy. They are not lying. They are simply endowed with certain qualities, certain color. When they are terrified by the enemy, they hide themselves and the enemy doesn't see them, but this is not a lie. When a dog barks, is in order to say there is somebody outside. I have never seen a dog who barks in order to make me to believe that there is somebody outside while it is not true. No. So that's why it is a dog, not a human being. So what characterizes a language as a language, sometimes we meet forms of behavior we are not sure if they are a language or not, if they have a semiotic nature or not. The test is, can be this behavior used in order to lie? If so, is a language. So it can be used in order to design a possible world, which is not the world of what is the case, and without informing me that it is tongue-in-cheek. I am only telling a story, the story of Achilles, of Ulysses, but from Homer on to make fiction means to have a tongue-in-cheek and to make a clin d'oeil,
A wink.
a wink to you. Okay, that's so lie. From lie, forgery. Forgery is a form of lie, not the only one. We lie every moment in our life because they are innocent lies. Nice to see you. You feel very well today. Yeah. Take care. You are interested in the health of that person. Take care. And then there are horrible lies. Okay. And forgery is specific for a very complex, a very artistic form
I was
of lying.
about to ask you the relationship between forgery and fiction making.
Yes, I thought. Let me take one of the paramount examples of forgery to which I devoted one of my novels, which is Baudolino, The Letter of Prester John. Okay, in the 12th century, it appeared a letter sent by an emperor, priest by chance, a priest and king, with the idea of the sacerdos and imperator, who describes a marvelous kingdom beyond the Muslim territories in Asia, but then the idea shifted and then it was in Africa. In any way, very far away, a kingdom full of riches, full of marvels, and full. It was a beautiful story. And it was a forgery and not a piece of fiction because it presented itself as a real document sent by a real king. And that was one of the forgeries that produced history, let's say, in a good sense, because even Marco Polo, when exploring China, he was looking for the kingdom of Prester John. And when the kingdom shifted from Asia to Africa, it encourages the Portuguese to explore Africa. It even justified, in a way, the Crusades, because if there was a Christian world beyond the Muslim one, then there was an opportunity and a sort of religious right to go through. And, what is the difference with a piece of fiction? A very thin. It is a pragmatic difference, we would say, technically speaking, is in the intention of the utterer, not in the object.
The intention.
The object. The intention. Suppose I give you Pinocchio, and I consider you a very gullible person, and it tells a real story that happened in Ruritania years ago, and you believe that there was really a puppet with a mobile nose, and the text is always the same. Is my intention, which has changed the fiction into a forgery. Okay.
No, to push it a little bit, I wonder if the skill involved in creating a good forgery is in any way parallel to the skill involved in writing a good piece of fiction.
But that is the problem of the protocols. Yeah. That is the problem,
right? Because
it is artistically ill-shaped. While the letter of Prester John is very good, and you can read it as a marvelous story, even the donation of Constantine was very well done, and it was taken seriously for 1500 centuries. The protocols, since they are not the work of Simonini, that's my novel, they are the product of a collective series of influences, and they are a patchwork. So they are self-contradictory. In one page they say A, in the other page they say non-A. So they are artistically incredible. And that is one of the great mystery, how they were believed so much. But I insisted many times in saying that there are books or movies able to create a cult just because they were not an harmonious form of art, but because they were out of joints. They were disconnected. The great case is Casablanca, who was done by mistake. Even the choice of the protagonist, who was the first one chosen for Casablanca. And since at the end he refused, they were obliged to take Humphrey Bogart. The first one was Ronald Reagan. Imagine with Ronald Reagan, Casablanca would be a complete flop. Or with Humphrey Bogart, President of the United States, probably. He would have been. And that's why Ingrid Bergman is so fascinating, because she didn't know until the end if she had to be in love with Paul Henreid or with Humphrey Bogart. She didn't know. And so she was always ambiguous in looking at both, so creating a very mysterious and fascinating. So the beauty of Casablanca is that they put together 2,000 cliches without to know how to mix them. Or take the most cult movie, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, which is completely out of joints. And that becomes cult. Why? Because you can pick up parts of it and use them without paying attention to the whole. That's why during the picture horror or Casablanca in the movies, young people, especially old people, pronounce the lines before the actors, because each of them knows a part of the movie. Run on the usual suspects. Voilà. Okay. And you can use a part of Casablanca without paying attention to the entire story. And the protocols are like that. You can use the cliche of page 10 without paying attention that in page 25 there is the opposite cliche. In that moment you are using that.
But can't you do that with any work?
You can illicitly do that with very complex works of art. With the Divine Comedy, there are disconnected works and works that you can disconnect due to their complexity. So you can do with Dante, with Homer, probably with Petrarch, but you can do with part of Shakespeare, but T.S. Eliot was very clear. He said why Hamlet is the most fascinating of his plays, because it's completely disconnected. He put together different sources. He was unable, even if there was Ingrid Bergman, she would have never known until the end if to be or not to be. That is the marvelous analysis made by Eliot apropos of Hamlet. Since he's completely disconnected, and probably not even Shakespeare knew how to go at the end, it is fascinating. And Eliot says it's not interesting because it's beautiful, but it's considered beautiful because it is interesting, because it always appeals us for some fundamental ambiguity. So they are disconnected works because they are bad. They are disconnected works because they are ambiguous, Hamlet. They are disconnectable works like Iliad, Divine Comedy, and so on, because they are so complex that it is like a wood in which you make your personal track for a cabin to a cabin, and you ignore all the rest. And then there are works that that are not out of joints. Madame Bovary is not out of joints. The Canterbury Tales are not out of joints.
And out of joint means
like a car in which something starts to break itself and
I see.
Dégringoler.
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 Or to use your favorite English word, discombobulate.
Yeah, discombobulating and discombobulating. No, but you can be discombobulated by a beautiful and complete work of art. I like.
I was about to mention, as you were mentioning Homer and the rest. But what strikes me, though, is to come back to this notion of lying. It's the ability of human beings, in this particular case of Simonini, of the possibility not only of creating hoaxes, not only of creating forgeries, but the possibility of ending up totally and utterly and profoundly believing the lies we create, so that we create another reality that becomes, and it reminded me of a passage which I don't know if you had to mind in Adolphe. There's a wonderful line in Benjamin Constant where he says, nous sommes des êtres tellement bizarres, tellement étranges que les sentiments que nous feignons, nous finissons par les éprouver. We are such strange, bizarre, I'm sorry, I had to say it in French first, but now I'll speak to you, we're such strange and bizarre human beings that the feelings we believe we pretend to have, we end up by feeling them.
Yeah, that's true. And Simonini at a certain moment starts to believe what he himself has forged.
Right.
Yes, and cannot understand why people don't believe what it has created. But then there is people, Simonini is not so. Simonini makes forgeries for money. But there are, on the contrary, people who have the real aesthetic pleasure of spending the entire life as a lie. Leo Taxil.
Yeah, Taxil, I was about to mention it.
Many readers believe I am a genius because I invented Leo Taxil. No, Leo Taxil really existed and did more and more of what I succeed in telling in those few pages. He started his activity by inventing the sharks on the Gulf of Marseille, moving all the French Navy to chase the sharks. Then in Geneva invented the submerged city, bringing scholars to explore the lake. Then he started a series of anti-clerical tracts, making flourishing industry against the church, but then he became Catholic and he produced anti-Masonic leaflets and books, but at the same time his wife was always selling under the counter the anti-clerical books because it remained a certain quantity of books to be sold, that at a certain moment he declared that all his denouncing of the Masonic hoaxes was an hoax of himself in order to baffle the Catholics, and in doing that he lost a lot of money. So you understand that an entire production of rentable books, it means that he did it for the pleasure of being always different from itself, even at the cost of ruining himself. He's an incredible character.
So he's amazingly Romanesque. He's amazingly
Romanesque.
He couldn't be a better invention even if you invented him.
Yes, but that's true, always true. Why I write mostly historical novels, because what you find in real history, even in the history of science, so is more Romanesque than what you can invent. Life has more fantasy and imagination than fiction. Could you invent a man like Berlusconi?
Say more.
No, no. Okay. So life is, I don't know, in the island of the day before, there is an episode that I think is pretty comic, because a German Jesuit, in order to observe upon a ship the movements of the satellites of Jupiter, constructs an enormous basin with oil inside, and inside on the oil another basin, and on the basin a sort of pedestal, and he sits there, and he had a sort of helm with a telescope, and so he believes he can observe the satellites without being disturbed by the movement of the ship, because the oil compensates. At a certain point there is something. This machine was invented by Galileo, who tried desperately to solve the idea to everybody, and everybody was smart enough to refuse it. So a genius like Galileo was also able to imagine absolute stupidity. Somebody had invented a thing like that and attributed it to Galileo, there was a big scandal. Oh, Galileo. Yes, he did that.
What strikes me in somebody like Taxil is, and also in Simonini, is how utterly shameless they are.
Yes, the real vice is the absence of shame. Yes,
it's endless.
Endless, yes.
How do you live a life made of what one might call such fantasy or so many intricate lies?
Are you asking this to me or to Simonini?
Both.
No, I'm full of shame, No, I think that shame is one of the instruments of morality. You don't do something evil fundamentally because you feel the shame of doing that. Or if not fundamentally, also because you can avoid doing evil because you think that God has prohibited it, or that. But shame is a sort of control of our behavior. The miserable people, and we know many of them still around us, are shameless. They are doing incredible things without any shame. Which is the principal feature of prostitution. Prostitution means, female or male prostitution means not to feel the shame of what they're doing, because they're doing it overtly, openly, without shame. Okay. Or the other, even if they do something reproachable, they try to do it in their room. The prostitute, male or female, has no shame. Okay.
In the case of both Taxila and Simonini, you have people who are shameless, and believe powerfully in their lies. And I mean, it's a very strange thing to say that you believe in your lies. But in some way, what happens is there is no notion anymore of what is true and what is false.
No, but I think that everybody sometimes, being obliged for some reason,
for social reason,
to lie at a certain moment, believes and behaves as the lie was true. Is also a sort of defense. I think I had to write another novel to explain this problem. There are certain, to believe his or her own lies I think is very normal. I have a friend who has a daughter, a very intelligent girl, now women with 2 children. And she became a psychiatrist. And my friend, for strange reason, didn't like to have a daughter psychiatrist. And he told that she was a psychoanalyst. It seems more elegant. No? So my daughter is a psychoanalyst. Once talking with the daughter, said, so you are a psychoanalyst? No, my patients bark. I have really mad people to cure every day, barking people. So, and my father doesn't want to know it. Now, my friends keeps going and believing that his daughter is a psychoanalyst. They have the advantage of living in two different parts of the world, and so he's not there to control what his daughter does.
But I'm interested in this phenomenon which you describe of how we tell stories about our lives, and how we also omit what one might call an excluding view of the self and a cumulative view of the self, one where we sort of erase, as it were, parts of our existence and tell a story, a biography of our own self, of our former self, where we shed away part of our life.
Yes, this is another story, but it has to be with line, because there are people like me, for instance, they are cumulative of their past. À la Proust, if you want. And so I try always to meet my friends of the primary schools, so I keep contacts with all my old world. I write Happy Christmas to all the girls of my life every year. And I want to keep this continuity of my life. There are other people who are living their life as an artichoke, peeling it, step by step. They want to remember only the immediate past. If you tell them, but you were the, no. They deny their own past, which is a form of self-lying, which is not a lie, it's a removal. Why? I don't know, but I know people like that, the artichoke-oriented people.
One of the phenomenons of the Protocol of the Elders of Zion is that though it was denounced actually in London in 1921, in the Times of London, 1921, it just doesn't go away.
No, it was more and more believed.
What is, I mean, I'm still trying to understand this phenomenon.
No, it's not so difficult. I tell always the story of Nesta Webster, an anti-Semite English woman who wrote a book on secret societies, but that book was obviously on the universal conspiracy. And he wrote it in 24, so she already knew that it was an hoax. And at the end she said, okay. It was a forgery. But since it says exactly what the Jews think, it is true. So there are certain texts that do not serve to create prejudice, but to reinforce prejudice. The protocol, out of joint such as it is very useful to reinforce your previous prejudice. You can pick up any detail according. I mean, the protocols works as the discourse of the used cars vendor. Do you remember that during a political campaign against Nixon, they said, would you buy a used car from that man? No, it means that the one who said...
Is that where it comes from? That's where that expression comes from. Is that where that expression comes from? Would you buy a car from that man?
No, you are asking me.
Yeah.
No, I remember.
I know.
No, I remember that it was used in the United States for the two definitions of Nixon were: would you buy a used car by that man? And the other is a man who enters after you in a revolving door and gets out first, which is marvelous as a definition.
Yeah.
Well, okay. The used car vendors tells you, that's a fantastic car because it's able to make 200 miles per hour. He's a tiger. And you say, yeah, but I have my children. He's the calmest, the more family-oriented car. You can go slowly, it's comfortable. And he used both the arguments, and you have only to pick up the one that reinforces your prejudice, because if you are there, it is already because you wanted that car and you wanted only to be convinced.
I had such a marvelous occasion of being with a car salesman in America once with my father, who for some reason has always loved American cars. And he's quite deaf. He doesn't hear very well. And in America, the custom is, for you, I'll give it to you for $12,000. And my father turned to me and said, what did he say? And I said, for you, he will give it for $12,000. And then the man, then he would say, well, in fact, I'll give it to you for 11. And then my father said, what did he say? And then he said, for you, he'll give it. And we undid, peeling away, we undid that man absolutely completely. He didn't anymore know any of his tricks because they didn't work. Here, about two months ago, I had occasion in New York to interview the filmmaker Errol Morris, who wrote a book recently called Believing is Seeing. And this is what he says, and I think it's very apropos of what you've written. He says, if we want to believe something, then we often find a way to do so, regardless of evidence to the contrary. Believing is seeing, and not the other way around.
Oh, yes. Remember, Proust, as everybody knows that Odette de Crécy has a weak morality, and Swann is the only one who wants to believe that it is untrue. It goes through 2 volumes of the research. It is untouched by every revelation or evidence. He wants to believe that Odette is a perfect woman.
Is that because love makes us blind?
Yes, usually, but also hatred.
I would like to go to something that isn't addressed enough, which is the structure of the book, the 3 voices. I don't want you to reveal too much, because I want the reader to reveal
Yes, it was a friend of mine, Claudio Magris, that interviewing me said, but it's very strange that people speak of your book always apropos of the content of the story and not apropos of the structure. It is more than evident because the content is so violent and so evident that people is interested by that. Second, in order to understand the structure of a complex book, sometimes you need some years. That's why the immediate reviews cannot, because the reviewer is obliged to read the book in 3 days and then to write the articles. While to explore the structure, the inner structure of a book, you need 3, 4, 5 readings. In this book, I was taken by a three structural problems, because there are first, vertically speaking, 3 voices. They are the journal of Simonini, they are the journal of the Abbot. Della Piccola, the reader is never sure if they are the same person with a split personality, or if they are two-person, also because at a certain moment there is an older Abbot della Piccola entering the story. And the narrator. The narrator should represent a meta-narrative instance, so to speak. But it is so very prudently. In other cases, I used a meta-narrative narrator, as in The Island of the Day Before, who always judges what is happening and what the character says or do. He cannot accept that they are speaking in a Baroque way. And so there is a sort of continuous quarrel between the narrator and the characters. Here, the narrator has only a summary function in order not to publish 40 years of a journal. He summarizes a certain element. But in doing that, he pronounces certain judgments on the character. So it is the 3 levels vertical structure. Then there is an horizontal structure by which there are the events known to the narrators, there are the events known to Simonini, who ignores what happens to Della Piccola, the events known to Della Piccola, who ignores what happens to Simonini, and at the end, and then there is, let's say, a transversal structure made by the flashback and flash forwards. So it was very tiring also for me to keep under control all those complex structures. And since in 6 years, I was also obliged to move certain episodes from the last chapter to the first movement. At a certain point, I've lost the sense of what was happening, and happily one of my translators, and before I had to publish the Italian edition, that stop, because in that chapter Simonini goes down in the cellar and finds 3 corpses, but 2 of them will be killed only later. Oh my God, that's true. I had moved the chapter and forgetting, just because of the complexity of this tribal structure. That's why I put at the end those explanations, as I were Stuart Gilbert making a sort of Baedeker for the Ulysses.
But you create difficulties for yourself.
Yes, difficult for myself and for the reader. Because the easiest of my novels, contemporary times, not erudition, plain language, was The Mysterious Flame of Queen Loana. It was the one which has sold less. So probably I write for a bunch of masochists.
This is the very first time that anyone believes that complexity sells better.
Yes, I think so, because people is tired by simplicity. People is sold every day for simple things.
One thing one should explain before people actually read your book is that the 3 voices also have 3 different typesets.
Well, this is an indulgent move on my part to make it easier for the reader. Sometimes I feel a certain complicity and compassion for the reader.
I think that's rather kind of you. I have to say your wife read the book in its first iteration where you didn't do that, where the typeset hadn't yet been set, as it were, and that was very difficult. It was extremely difficult to follow.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So do you do this in the same way with the illustrations in the book? Is there other illustrations there to ease the reading? Or are they a kind of a clin d'oeil, since you were talking about the wing?
The illustration have
several functions.
Several functions. One is that since my book is a little imitating the popular novel of the 19th century, all those novels were illustrated. Okay. And not only the popular one, all the novels of the 19th century and the one of the 18th century were illustrated from the beginning. And so, and second is that I like to illustrate the books. My previous one, Queen Loana, is completely illustrated. And the previous one have always a map, a diagram, something, because I believe that, so when somebody said, you imitate Sebald. No, I started it with the name of the rose, where there is the map of the abbey, probably because I worked in a publishing house making illustrated books, and so I feel this sort of multimedia pleasure. The illustration have the function, at the first glance, to give the reader that I am telling a fictional story, because they are clearly illustration coming from the books of that era, that epoch. But suddenly the reader jumps over a real document. It is one page of the La Libre Parole of Drummond, a portrait.
Horrible, another.
And so the reader says, oh my God. So it was true. It was not a story, it was true. So is discombobulated.
So it's an ambivalence.
And he feels an ambivalent feeling, yes. He doesn't know how much to believe it or not. And so step by step he starts to believe that everything was true. Even though, because sometimes he meets names that are so recognizable, like Garibaldi or Napoleon III of the Israeli, that obviously the reader understands that it is dealing with real events.
Or Drummond.
No, Drummond is ignored by, no, it's not. You cannot stop on the street a Frenchman asking, do you know Drummond? They don't know Drummond. Unless, no Taxil. Taxil was completely forgotten at a certain moment. No, Drummond, not. Only the specialist, okay, because he was dominating the French politics also in l'affaire Dreyfus and so on. The Panama scandal, he was having big influence as an anti-Semitic reactionary writer with an important journal, magazine, and so on and so forth. Then he became a new quotidiano. Okay, he became a daily paper, but it has been forgotten, Drummond. But it was an interesting person.
The illustrations, to go back to them for a moment, is this also a way, because these books mattered to you as a child, to return in some way to an earlier self?
Well, certainly. That was more evident with the Queen Loana, in which obviously I assembled all the memories of my childhood. All the images that are there were from the 30s to the 40s and no more. So that was really my lost and reconquered past. Here it was the pleasure of using all this material that fascinated me when I was a young reader, all the adventures, okay.
Dumas in particular.
Dumas, but even the things that are not there, like Jules Verne or Salgari. And so the fictional material comes from early readings.
Are you still playing an instrument?
Unfortunately, I played too many of them. Every kind of instrument for a short time, but if you remember in the Foucault's Pendulum, there is the story of a young man with a trumpet. The trumpet played a very important role in my imagination during the adolescence, childhood, adolescence, and even it's my Madeleine. It's my Madeleine.
Your trumpet is your Madeleine?
Yes. Madeleine, pas trempée dans la tilleule, but trumpet dans la tilleule. But since 50 years, I am playing the block flute, the soprano recorder. I play very badly professional scores. There are people who play perfectly reduced scores for amateur. No, I play badly the professional one.
So again, you challenge yourself.
Oh yes, if not, there is no amusement.
You have created a very ambitious novel here. Do you agree with that comment?
I think that the most stupid writer, when starting writing, believes to become Homer. Then most of them do not succeed in reaching this point. But it is once always, even though, to be sincere, with that book I was more uncertain than with the previous ones.
Yeah,
I was not sure that it could work this way, so that it happened what I did only at the beginning with the name of the rose, that I gave it to read to at least 10 persons. I didn't do that with the other books. With the name of the rose, it was the first time, so I wanted to have some reactions. And they were in general negative.
And really?
But the friends say, oh no, this is too long, that maybe, well, nice, yes. It can make 2,000 copies.
So you've learned not to take the comments of your friends seriously?
I think that the writer has never to take the comments seriously. If not, he loses his balance, mental balance, because they are so controversial. I was educated by the story that my grandmother told me of the old man with the little child and the donkey. And they were going, and the child said, "Grandfather, you are so old, and so mount on the donkey." And people will say, "Look, that man who is killing the donkey and making the young boy to walk." And they heard it and said, decide to put the child on the donkey. And people said, "Look, that how egoistical is the child, while the poor man." So they decide to mount both on the donkey. They say, "Look," so they decide to leave the donkey free and to walk both. And people said, "How stupid they are. They have a donkey and they don't use it." And to write a book is the same situation. Yeah. At a certain point to say, okay, I do what I want.
But you don't only do what you want, because also by ambition, I mean you also create situations where your characters have to encounter, for instance, Freud.
Now, this is another...
It's a very interesting... Freud, F-R-O-I-D-E.
Yes, it's written like that, because if it were written in the right way, the French would have said Freud. And since Simonini meets Freud in Paris, but he doesn't see his name written, but Freud, so he writes it as a French could write it in order to pronounce it Freud and not Freud. Well, you are asking another question, which, yes, we said before, and I avoid the answer. I always put in my novels constrictions, situations that I am not obliged to put there, and then oblige me to change radically the whole story. Example, in Baudolino, I decided that it had to start with the siege of Constantinople, which is a sort of suicide because Baudolino writes in my fiction, the letter of Prester John at the middle of the 12th century. The siege of Constantinople is 1204, so I had 45 years in which I didn't know what to do and what to make Baudolino to do. Why I want to put Constantinople? Because I had never visited Constantinople. And so since I am not a tourist, I needed an alibi to go to Constantinople. And the book to write was an alibi. And so I went to Constantinople, and I used Constantinople. But I didn't know what Baudolino had to do in those 54 years in order to, before going as well in the search of the kingdom of Prester John and returning to stop in Constantinople. And so I had to invent a lot of reason for delaying its departure. And it created the spasm of desire in Baudolino, I hope in some readers, and certainly in the structure of the novel. In this novel, I wanted Simonini to visit the Salpêtrière hospital in Paris, where Charcot was at that time the great, brilliant mind. Why? Because I have been always interested by Charcot, but I didn't have time to read something about him. And so, in order to write a novel, I had 6 years at my disposal. I could pile up books on Charcot and his researches on hysteria. That gave me a lot of material to create 2 cases of double personality, split personality. And in the same years in which, for Baudolino arriving to Paris goes to the Salpêtrière, there was Freud visiting Charcot. So why not to put Freud in the story?
You meant Simonini, not Baudolino.
Baudolino,
yeah,
Simonini.
it's interesting.
And Freud, what was interesting that Freud at that time was thinking only to his fiancée. He was not interested in sexual interpretation. He had not invented psychoanalysis. He was mainly interested in cocaine. He believed that cocaine could cure every disease, even children's disease. There is this marvelous image I found by mere chance on internet in which there is a real advertising cocaine for children to take drops. There are to take drops, cocaine, instantaneous cure and there are 2 playing children, so cocaine was given to children. And so it was interesting to make Freud to speak about his fancies, and I was entitled to make him to say, I think that I will be never interested in sex, in studying psychiatric disease, because it's different stories and like this. And I saw he met Freud, Dr. Freud.
I've always wondered, and I want to ask you now in public, how important Oulipo and particularly some writers like Georges Perec were for you. Because in a way, I recognize in you, in this particular instance, a kind of Perec move.
You make me a strange question, because I met the Oulipo very early in '61, when in a congress I met François Le Lyonnais, Yves Berger. They started telling me about Oulipo, and then I translated Exercice de Style by Queneau. So it was really inside the Oulipo, and I was a good friend of Calvino, and Calvino was concerned with Oulipo, and so on. So I should say the last one I came across was just Perec. And just 2 days ago in Toronto, a friend of mine was wasted a lot of his time in writing about me, told me that he is on the verge of finishing a long essay in which he shows the continuous parallelism between my work and Prague. And so I would say, of the people of Oulipo, Prague was the one who was less influenced me. But it seems that, there are also unconscious influence. You are influenced by books you have read 50 years before. Once one of my friends, after The Name of the Rose, said, but you should have been influenced by Dmitry Merezhkovsky. It's like Taksil. Nobody knows any longer who he was. He was a decadent Russian writer between the end of the beginning of the 20th century, wrote historical books on Leonardo, Julian the Apostate, and so. I read Merezhkovsky at the age of 12. So
you did?
Yes. So probably a certain influence worked, or maybe not, it was my friend. But sometime I discovered to be largely influenced by a book I had not read at all.
But I mean, and this probably, in closing, this is...
We have discussed
we have
3 years ago with Bayard.
We had this conversation at the library about 3 years ago. If you haven't read this book, I highly recommend it, or maybe you don't need to read it.
Bayard
was
written a book on the fact that we are speaking continuously and competently of the books we have not read.
So the book is called How to Talk About Books You Haven't Read. And there is a chapter on Umberto Eco. In my impishness, I believed it would be interesting to bring Umberto Eco together with Pierre Bayard. And I remember the very first line I uttered, you corrected me immediately. I won't make that mistake again. I said, Umberto Eco, who has a library of 30,000 books. And you said, no, 50,000. And this phenomenon...
I am a teacher.
Yeah, and this phenomenon of the books beckoning, nearly what Benjamin talks about when he talks about the sex appeal of the inanimate. This is something you're under the influence greatly when you walk around your library. Describe Umberto Eco walking and looking at his shelves.
No, it gives you the sense of confidence and continuity, not only with your past, but with the universal past. Okay, you feel very confident, saying that all the wisdom you need is there. You couldn't feel the same feeling having a box full of USB. That would be different. The same way in which it can be moving to find in your cellar the edition of Pinocchio you read at the age of 6 with your scribbles, the mark of your thumbs, and if you found the iPad or USB of Pinocchio, you didn't feel any emotion. So it's very beautiful to walk around the corridors of your library. But the typical case is the one in which you have not read the books in your library. That is the majority of the books. Otherwise, why to keep a library only to store the books you have already read? No, you have a library as a place in which you can find, every time you need, the book to read. And it happens that certain books are looking at you for years and years with a sort of reproach, and you feel embarrassed and ashamed. And finally, after 30 years, you have that book on your shelf. You pick it up, you open it, start reading, and you discover that you knew perfectly what he was saying. Reasons. One is a little occultistic, since I believe I belong to the Skeptical Association Against Abnormal Experiences. but it seems that something passes by the book through your fingers to your brain, and so you absorb a part of the wisdom of the book. The second one is that every time in 30 years you picked up the book, even though only for polishing it or to displace it, to find another book, without realizing it, you open it and you read something. And the third reason, the most scientific, that in those 30 years you have read many other books that were speaking of that one. And so when you open it, you discover. So at a certain moment, you have the impression to have read all of your books, which is false, but it's very consoling.
Thank you very much.